I was given the task of trying to cover what is done in forestry extension on climate change, and so I just wanted to start with what is extension forestry, and so this was an interesting assignment for me. And there's a recent article by Eli Sagor in the Journal of Forestry that actually categorized who's doing what in forestry management. And so he found 249 full-time equivalents and specialists, educators, and staff across the country working on forestry issues. And he found that of that, half of the programs had increased instruction in climate change in the last 5 years. So these are the kinds of things we're talking about anyway. Forest health, intergenerational land transfer, climate change is right up there, and this is the number of programs that are doing more of that now than they were in the last 5 years. So obviously in forestry, climate is a big concern for us. Agriculture, I know that's true too, but people are making yearly decisions, maybe 5, maybe 20-year decisions on what they're going to plant in their infrastructure. In forestry, we're making 100-year decisions for long-lived organisms, and so climate is always a concern. We have adapted organisms that have been there. In the Sierra Nevada where I work, a rotation could be 80 years, 100 years, that length. So clearly we've been thinking about more long-term how the climate affects plants in our field. And so I approach this by looking at the different ways that extension forestry involves climate education, and I developed my own little way of thinking about things, as I normally do. And so I just wanted to give you that framework. So individually, we're responding to climate-driven events, obviously. So this is in the Sierra Nevada where I work. This is what I've been working on for the last 10 years. Lots of increase in high-severity wildfire, and then most recently we have an increase in drought-induced mortality from bark beetles. So basically, we need to help people understand how to manage their forests to avoid some of these disturbances, and in forestry, thinning is the answer. In most of our western forests, we have too many trees, too much fire suppression over time, so we have a very high level of stocking that cannot handle these disturbances that are occurring. So if you want to call that mitigation to thin forests, I'm very happy, because that makes me think I'm very pro-mitigation. In general, we have too much carbon on the landscape in a lot of our western dry forests, and it's unsustainable. So if we can thin the forests, they can handle these disturbances so that they can live through wildfires and periods of drought. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good scientific information about what to plant in my area. I know in some other areas they've had provenance tests for how are new seedlings going to be doing in different climate scenarios in the future, and I'd say we're really just getting started on that. We're in the West. We don't have, British Columbia has been a big leader in that. They've been testing and moving tree species around quite a bit, but we don't seem to be quite there yet. So in an area like this, what do I suggest for a landowner about seed zones, about what they should replant? Because that tree hopefully will live 80 to 100 years. So I think we could get some better science on that, and some of it we're just going to be guessing, and we have to be very careful with how we advise, what the future is going to be. So that's what I do. We have specialists on our Berkeley campus, and thank you for this assignment, because I emailed my colleague Bill Stewart, who does a lot of work on climate research and policy, and I got to ask him, hey, what is it that you do? And he sent me a very long list. But this is just some of the things that he's doing. We do have mitigation infrastructure in California, and it's technically not straightforward. We have AB 32 that encourages mitigation in different locations. We have a carbon market. We have the idea that people could purchase carbon offsets from forests if you manage your trees with increasing carbon on the landscape. It's all pretty complicated, so I personally have not been very involved with it. My understanding of it is that right now, if you want to sell a carbon offset and show that your forests are mitigating somebody else's carbon. The inventory required on an annual basis is very expensive, so it's going to have to be a large ownership, and with smaller ownerships, it's not something currently that's feasible. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on mitigation and how to make it usable for a small landowner, because we're not there yet, and hopefully, we'll get there. These are some of the things that Bill is busy doing. When we have mitigation infrastructure, there's a lot of regulators who maybe don't really quite understand the science behind it or the context of the producers. So I know that he spends a lot of his time trying to explain forest management, forest products as carbon storage, and help them understand and get the policies right. I also looked up on the internet and tried to find what my colleagues were doing. So the University of Minnesota has a program on sustainable forests, an education cooperative. And so they've done some online climate adaptation training for their resource professionals. They had an online course targeting advanced landowners on climate content, forest adaptation content, and an exercise from forest adaptation workbook up in the north central area. They also have been doing workshops for their Department of Natural Resources and trying to train those folks. So I'm moving from what individual folks can do to actually climate impacts as a particular program. I was asked to find a program for you, and I felt like I don't really have a program. I have a lot of stuff I'm doing, but I can't say that it's an ongoing climate program. It's just like dealing with all the climate issues that we're working on right now. I think both our last speakers mentioned the Climate Science Initiative, which Chris Jones, wave your hand, Chris Jones, founded, and that's through our Extension Professional Society, ANREP, and it's promoting system-wide cooperative extension response. And so it provides professional development. I first went to my, I think, 2009 workshop that you hosted in Flagstaff for extension foresters and how we could work with climate issues with our clientele. We develop educational materials, print, and also do a series of webinars. So there's a website, there's workshops, and there's resources exchanging among us so that we can figure out how we're working together on that. Some of us are involving clientele in climate research, so like the Phenology Network, the season tracker is being done by Oregon to help gather data and figure out when things are happening. Oregon also told me they're doing, I called it a media campaign, but they have a climate change blog. They've done 11 articles over a year-long period with lots of visitors, and feel like that they made an impact through that with specific targeting at forestry. We have the e-extension climate change community of practice, which is kind of online organizing all extension folks. So we have a number of folks there who are answering questions and have webinars and working together with the Climate Science Initiative. And then I found Pine Map. Martha, what a fabulous program. I had never heard of it. I'm so envious of our Southeast colleagues. I was very impressed. It's the Pine Integrated Network Education, Mitigation, and Adaptation Project funded by NIFA, and they've collaborated across 20 million acres with pine forests in the Gulf and Atlantic states. And basically, they're integrating research, extension, education all across the southern pine forest types. So they have partnerships, they have advisory committees, they've developed web-based decision support systems on genetics and silviculture, which is what I was just saying. I wish I had something like that. And they've trained educators and done impact assessments, all in a collaborative fashion. They have a huge partnership. I was very impressed by that too. If you look at 59 principal investigators, all those universities, and outside other organizations as well as their climate consortium. I had one more slide, but it's not there. That's okay. It was just a list of like the 40 projects from year 4, including the one that you talked about, Martha, which I was very impressed that, that they're doing something on that scale. I haven't seen anything like that in the West, and I think that would be awesome.